Welcome to the Compact Podcast. Today we'll discuss Trump's win in New Hampshire and Nikki Haley's perseverance. We'll also talk about Texas's standoff with the federal government over border security and Barbie's Oscar snub. I'm joined by Sohrab Ahmari and Nina Power, and I'm Matthew Schmitz. Trump won last night in New Hampshire. It's a place that Nikki Haley had really staked her campaign. It has an open primary, so independents can enter the primary and vote. She did decently well. I think Trump had a narrow double-digit win. Haley said she's prepared to fight on. In his victory speech, Trump called attention to her dress, said she was kind of dressed in a fancy manner, criticized her for giving a speech as though she had won. He said that she kind of gave a victory speech even though she had lost the primary. One thing that struck me was, in her remarks, really the first time I've watched Haley outside of the debates, she didn't draw up any policy contrasts between herself and Donald Trump. She said, I voted for Trump twice in 2016 and 2020. For me, this is not personal. It's really a matter of competence and also a matter of age. She said Trump had a senior moment. So her argument was basically, and she associated Trump with chaos. So she said, if you want competence, if you don't like chaos, if you want someone who's younger, go with me. But she said that she supported Trump on a lot of issues. And really, she drew no substantive contrast between herself and Trump. That's interesting because there are very real policy differences between Nikki Haley and Donald Trump, yet she's not drawing attention to them. Why is that, Sohrab?
Well, because it's obvious that her policy positions are way out of whack with where the Republican base is these days and has been, since 2015-16. As you noted, Matthew, in your New York Times guest essay, I guess a couple of weeks ago now, Trump's policy positions, notwithstanding crazy rhetoric, his policy positions are actually quite moderate. They're much closer to like the center of the country on issues like entitlements. He's doesn't want to cut them. Foreign interventionism. Everyone's sick of regime change wars. Certainly Republicans are. To draw attention to those contrasts would be further doom herself with the Republican electorate if she has any chance. I don't think she really does, because Nikki Haley wants to lower the retirement age. Nikki Haley wants to expand kind of the privatization of Medicare through something called Medicare Advantage. What that would entail is just the entry of the ghoulish aspects of the private health insurance industry into something that's been a functioning public system. Those are really unpopular things with Republicans and frankly, with the country at large. Every reason she shouldn't draw attention to that. It's notable that, as you said, New Hampshire is known as a kind of moderate electorate. It is not a MAGA place. And you could pinpoint that in terms of some of the exit polling. The share of people who identify as born again or white evangelical was much smaller than it is in Iowa. The share of people who describe themselves as part of the MAGA movement is much smaller than it was in Iowa. The share of people who believe that Joe Biden's election victory in 2020 was illegitimate, which was like 2/3 of Iowa voters in the primary, in the Iowa caucuses, was much lower. It was less than half in New Hampshire. All of those suggest a very difficult state for Donald Trump. Then you add her money advantage. She and her allied super PAC spent $30 million compared to Donald Trump's $15 million. She spent a lot more ground time in New Hampshire. She basically was there every day of the past month or so, somehow or other, only slightly exaggerating. You put all that together, and so this was her best state, and nevertheless couldn't manage with Republicans who voted in the New Hampshire primary. Why do I say Republicans? Because as you noted in your opening spiel, Matthew, New Hampshire is an open primary state. So first of all, before October 6th, you could change your affiliation from Democrat to undeclared or from Democrat to Republican and vote in the primary. Trump made a huge deal of that and said, Democrats are infiltrating the primary. It's actually fairly small, very minuscule share of Democrats actually change their affiliation that way. But it's also a state where you can register to vote the very day of the primary. And so any number of self-declared independents or Democratic-leaning independents did vote. Definitely Haley did better with them than Trump did, but Trump did better, far better with independents still, given that makeup, than Haley did with self-declared, self-identified Republican voters. And that was the gap that she couldn't. So the bottom line is, why is she not drawing attention to her policy contrasts? It's because the people who really will drive this primary process are mainly Republican voters, and they are solidly with him. And I think a point that you and I have consistently tried to make, going back to honestly, like early 2022, is that the differences matter. A lot of people say, well, Trump's just winning because the MAGA base is hypnotized by him.
Yeah, it's a personality cult or something, without denying the fact that the personality is important, right?
Yeah, but like if you want to unseat him, if you want to dethrone him, don't run someone who wants to make Americans in their late 40s who've been in the labor market for more than 20 years now, don't make them have to work an additional like 10, 15, whatever many years before they can hit retirement. That's an idea that's just broadly unpopular with Americans at large, as you pointed out in your Times essay, but is very popular, with like libertarian think tankers and Wall Street people and, mega donors. If you don't want if you don't want him to claim that space, just don't run like a neoliberal ghoul.
Yeah, I think despite all the questions about election integrity in America, you didn't have a chance yet to vote in our primary, Nina. Our election procedures haven't yet become that flexible and prone to fraud.
Sadly no. But I mean, I just wanted to add something when, looking up this story and again from outside about New Hampshire, but that, voters without a college degree apparently backed Trump by 2-1 as well. So even though New Hampshire, I guess I would associate it with like middle class, sort of nature-y and so on. The thing is, it's like Trump's popularity with the working class and people who didn't go to college is just seemingly unshakable. Like, and it completely makes sense, right? But in terms of his policy, precisely these kind of moderate policies that don't have these libertarian dimensions, the aspect of character, not a personality cult, we've discussed this before, but nevertheless, someone with whom you can identify as somebody who has worked as a businessman, who knows how the world works, who understands how people work and so on. And of course, he's going to appeal to like that group of people. And thankfully, the middle class or the PMC, the professional managerial class, are not quantitatively large enough, whether as Republicans or Democrats. We hope. We'll come to the question of immigration and how recent migrants vote, which I think can't be discounted as one of the aspects of mass immigration. It's long been a policy or a dimension of this policy, also in the UK and elsewhere, that recent arrivals tend to vote left or Labour. But I think, we have to just face the facts. Trump is extremely popular with average working people for extremely good reasons. And whether they shove him in prison and he's voted in from prison, which I think would be spectacular and cinematic as befitting America, we shall see. But this popularity is not going to abate anytime soon.
Yeah, I saw someone wearing a T-shirt that had kind of old style wanted poster, and it had the Trump mug shot on it and said "Wanted for President." So that kind of expresses that kind of cinematic image you're talking about, Nina. So, Rob, one thing you observed in a column for the New Statesman, where you report on American affairs, was that Nikki Haley may still have a shot, even though she really has no chance of winning a single state. You argue that if lawfare takes Trump out, in the way Nina's talking about, Haley could find her way in. I mean, how real is that possibility, do you think?
It's absolutely real in terms of an aspiration on the part of Haley, the billionaires who back her, including many Democratic billionaires, like the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman, and certainly the sort of Republican establishment voices like the Wall Street Journal editorial page. I don't know what the sort of legal mechanics that they're thinking of, how that would work, right? Because as you know, there's like a nominating convention. It's called the Republican National Convention. You have to earn delegates. And of course, Trump will win sufficient delegates likely to lock in the convention. If he's not convicted from now till then, but it's another point that Matthew, you and I have kind of emphasized, is that for a decisive marginal share of voters, including Republican primary voters, they think that Trump is fine now and they could vote for him and they could even support him, certainly support him in the general. But that if he's convicted, they would view that as a kind of a disqualifying mark against him. tremendously many in Republic, but it's a marginal sharing. People were interviewed and exit polled in Iowa and said this, in New Hampshire, and they said this. So they're basically saying, we like Trump right now, or we like his policies, but if he's convicted in a court of law, that changes the game for us. And so I think my interpretation is Haley's just sticking around in the hope that such a conviction will come down at some point from now till the July convention, and she'll somehow swoop in and replace him. Now, again, it's a little bit like, the meme that goes like, step 1, buy towels. Step 2, ? Step 3, prosper and make millions. It's a little bit like that in terms of the legal theory of how she would do that. It has to do with like the Republican Party's internal rules for replacing the nominee and delegates and all that. It's very complicated and not at all clear how she was going to do it. But I think that's the mentality. The Wall Street Journal editorial page more or less is urging her to stay for this reason. And an editorial they published in today's paper, the Journal editorial page, which is very much, on Team Haley, says, quote, if she can remain competitive, there's an argument for Ms. Haley to stay in the race through the July convention. Mr. Trump faces a treacherous legal road. Ms. Haley could stay in the race, rack up delegates, and see what happens if he is found guilty. So I think it's they're not even, the establishment forces are not even trying to hide that this is the game. Well, like lawfare, let's hope for the best. I mean, is that how you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Trump is very polarizing. The fact that he is almost certain to get the Republican nomination and has a good chance of returning to the presidency is going to be a focus of much condemnation, a lot of outrage, and a great deal of catastrophizing rhetoric. He will be presented as a clear and present danger, as a threat to democracy, as someone who will overthrow our system of government, gravely imperil our liberties, perhaps end America as we know it. When the rhetoric is that intense, it's not hard to imagine someone taking that rhetoric seriously and trying to take the solution into their own hands. That is a possibility. We really don't know what'll happen in the coming months, but I think there is such a kind of febrile political environment, and the rhetoric is so intense. We saw the shooting of Representative Steve Scalise. He was practicing for the congressional baseball team. Political shooting in the past, things of this sort do happen. God forbid, but that's another possibility. And that, of course, would create really big questions about who would be the Republican nominee. And speaking of those kind of substantive issues, just this week saw the Supreme Court step in and say that Border Patrol had the right to cut concertina wire that Texas had installed along its border with Mexico. Really, here we saw a kind of standoff between two sources of power in our system, the federal government and the state of Texas. The state of Texas, under Governor Greg Abbott, has been trying to take a more hardline immigration stance. Most famously, it's been kind of busing migrants and flying migrants to other locales to draw attention to the border crisis, but it's also really tried to step up enforcement and do things that the federal government is unwilling to do. That includes building border wall. That includes putting up this kind of sea wire along the border, and also putting buoys in the Rio Grande. It's really a bit of a fiasco. You have these kind of overlapping jurisdictions, and they're taking the kind of people charged with enforcing the law have very different understandings of what the law means. The Supreme Court stepped in and said, no, look, Border Patrol has the kind of final say over the border. Anyway, Sohrab, what do you make of this conflict between Texas and the government?
Controlling the border is a federal responsibility. So on, strictly constitutional grounds, I can see why the Supreme Court majority came down where it did. And in all sorts of ways, when it comes to sort of dealing with U.S. sovereignty and who is, for example, allowed to come in and who is not. And this is a broad principle. The Supreme Court has, generally speaking, favored the view that this is all a federal responsibility and a federal prerogative in such a way that it's almost a kind of plenary power that it's the U.S. can decide, for example, whether or not to admit a visa applicant or not, and there's just, you can't go to a state court and appeal that. It's just a sort of prerogative of the executive branch. Working out from that logic, you can see how in terms of the shape of the U.S.-Mexico border, barriers that are put up there or not falls into the same category of issues. That said, I'm very sympathetic to Texas's position. I'm very sympathetic to the position of all these border states where they are being asked to shoulder this enormous responsibility of the millions of people who are streaming across the border and all the sort of social pathologies and problems that they bring, from fentanyl to human trafficking to crime to the fact that there's no sense of health-related checks. That puts a lot of pressure on border areas and border states. And I'm sympathetic to what they're trying to do and where they're coming from. When the federal government is this unresponsive to those kinds of concerns, then what happens is that it loses political legitimacy over border control, even if it retains, strictly speaking, legal legitimacy or legal supremacy when it comes to issues relating to sovereignty and the border. When you don't deal with the problem and you sort of create a visible crisis, which is visible where you and I live, Matthew, and right here in New York, the migrant encampments, the putting them up in public schools now, et cetera, et cetera. It's a visible crisis, not just in places like the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, but right here in New York. When you don't deal with that, the Supreme Court might help you maintain the sort of legal, perhaps fiction of sovereignty and control. But in the eyes of the people and in the kind of political judgment of the people, you've lost it. And I think that's what's really at stake here, is a conflict between the federal government's legal prerogative and its political legitimacy.
Yeah, similar questions re-immigration in the UK. We've had a kind of delay on the proposed plan to deport possible illegal migrants to Rwanda. Rwanda have described Britain as a country in chaos. And Rishi Sunak, whose popularity is diminishing by the day, it's looking likely that the Tories will maybe have to call another leadership campaign ahead of any general election, which is likely to happen quite soon. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is the frontrunner to become Prime Minister. The Tories have been in power for a very long time. Under their rule, its immigration has massively increased, despite their policies and claims that they will reduce immigration. So, we are obviously an island. People come across from France or via Italy, via Libya, and the various camps that exist or have existed in France come over. And no politician is really kind of addressing this issue properly. It's very unlikely that Labour will take a strong stance against immigration. That's not what they would do. It seems like it's likely that at some point in the future, someone will run on a anti-immigration ticket, as we've seen in many European countries under various populist leaders, who then challenged on their democratic status by people who claim that they can't be part of the democratic system, and people will refuse to work with them in coalition, as we saw with Geert Wilders. I think Britain will be soon in that position somehow. At least there'll be some opposition on precisely this issue, because it has not been addressed as the voters and the population would like it to be. And I think you can't keep ignoring this issue before it becomes a major one for large numbers of people.
You mentioned the voters wanting this issue to be addressed and the fact that it isn't. It's something we see here in America. There's really wide opposition to this kind of unregulated migration that we're seeing, really chaos at the border. And people want a tighter immigration system. They want a regularized and legal immigration system, but nothing seems to happen. It doesn't. We don't really move in that direction, despite the will of the voters. There's again been a lot of talk of defense of democracy and the importance of democracy. That term has a certain kind of partisan coloring, and it's democracy is the good version. Populism, of course, is the bad version. But the fact that voters seem to be unable to express their will on such an important issue, I think, is one of the reasons that we see, obviously the rise of populism and also a certain loss of trust in our institutions. If we're going to defend democracy, we should probably try to figure out ways to make our system actually responsive to the clearly expressed desires of voters. We don't seem to be very good at that. The Oscar nominations came out. Barbie, surely one of the greatest films of all time, received many nominations, but it was snubbed. It was snubbed. Greta Gerwig, the writer and director, wasn't nominated, and neither was Margot Robbie, who played a title role. However, and this is the real twist of the knife, Ryan Gosling, who played Ken, was nominated for Best Actor. How are we to account for this, and what can we do to redress this injustice?
Well, as you remember, I covered this film for Compact. I did my best to emulate one of our other contributors, Slavoj Žižek, and write a kind of deeply serious theoretical take on the film, which does permit these kind of, slightly pretentious readings. I think, as many wags have pointed out since the Oscar nominations have recently come out, that this is literally the plot of the film Barbie, which is basically that Barbie, the Margot Robbie character, Barbie, once you're taken out of this kind of highly feminized world, that the patriarchy is real and that Barbie's great achievements are not taken into consideration. And Ken, just by virtue of being a man, is somehow treated with reverence and respect in the real world, which is to say our world and the world beyond Barbie world. Ryan Gosling is this kind of sort of apex soft boy, we have to say. He's this very sort of beautiful, sort of quite feminine man, and of course playing Ken as this doll, it had these kind of slightly sort of appeal to gay men, and it's sort of designed to do so. And he's a very pretty man, and he's indeed come out in support of Greta Gerwig, who co-wrote the film with her husband, but is absolutely recognised as, the director and, the inspiration behind the film, and Margot Robbie, and saying how sort of disappointed he is that they haven't been nominated. And he has, precisely because it is repetition of the patriarchal world as depicted in the film. I don't know. I mean, does anyone still care about the Oscars? I think film has moved on and the appreciation of film is so fragmented these days, and there are so many films that don't get even noticed by the Oscars that are so much greatly superior. It may have even been done to generate precisely this kind of faux outrage. I wouldn't be surprised. We had a whole period where, frankly, minor female directors were being praised as somehow having written the best films ever. We saw this with Chantal Akerman, who is a fantastic filmmaker, but is in no way the best film that was ever made. It's a very good and interesting film. So I think we discussed it on our podcast at some point, but I think we have to take all of this as a kind of PR campaign for these awards themselves, precisely because they're not as central to our cultural life as they used to be. So they are thinking behind the scenes, how can we generate some stories? And in that sense, they've
I have to admit the hubbub has reminded me of the movie's existence and made me think, maybe I should watch it if I ever have a spare moment. Sohrab, have you been Barbie pilled?
I have not. No. Something about because it's on Max, which is of the various streaming services, that's the one I have because it comes free with our phone service. I refuse to subscribe to Netflix. And it's always being promoted at the very top when you first come to Max on your TV and your homepage. And something about the combination of pink colors that is part of the movie's branding plus Barbie just makes me never want to click that thing. I'm like, where is the Cronenberg collection? I mean, I should see it because
my essay. I can't believe my
notwithstanding Nina's essay, which did very, very well and was widely discussed. And the essay is enough for me. I'm like Žižek on that count. I will form my opinion about the movie based on Nina's essay and the Wikipedia page.
Yeah, I did have a lot of friends who really enjoyed it and found it interesting. I think Nina's essay did a great job of drawing that out. I guess, this does raise a kind of question, which is, is snubbing or cancellation just the only way to kind of generate interest in, or maybe the most reliable way to generate interest in cultural products today? So whether it's, you can do that from the kind of more woke or progressive angle, like discriminated against, or look, we were snubbed because we're women. Not really that plausible for the reasons you suggest, Nina, given the kind of eagerness to celebrate female directors. Then again, Barbie was a huge success, and I don't really know why Gerwig wouldn't be nominated, at least for this. It's not clear to me. And then on the right, we had a piece this week from Valerie Stivers, in-house critic, titled "The Perils of Dissident Literature," talking about a new collection of stories, several of which she very much enjoyed, but they're marketed as kind of heretical fictions that you can't read elsewhere. And what I think we're really seeing in things like this is the emergence on the right, kind of the mirror image of the left's long-running obsession with banned books, kind of celebration of banned books week. You kind of have, they don't want you to read this. They don't want you to read To Kill a Mockingbird. And I saw this photo of someone posted online of a display. It looked like maybe a Barnes and Noble or something like that. It was a kind of banned books display at To Kill a Mockingbird. It had The Lord of the Rings, A Handmaid's Tale, just a random assortment of books, but several of them, I kind of wonder, like, The Lord of the Rings was banned, under someone just disapproved of silly stories, involving orcs and trolls or whatever. I mean, in what sense are these things banned? And I just wonder if these categories are just being expanded as much as possible, because we all understand that something that is forbidden is more appealing, something that is suppressed is more alluring. I do think, Nina, you raise a great question. What kind of, is there marketing upside in this, and could we see in future cases, if not in this one, a real effort to embrace that marketing upside by kind of manufacturing outrage?
In order to prop up both the finances of the Vatican and the major sort of publishers, they should come to a deal where the church fully restores its index of forbidden books. Both would benefit, right? Because the church would get a cut of those books. I mean, obviously this would go against various moral precepts, but if they did go for it, I think if you put something on a list like that, it's going to shoot up the Amazon list, and then the publishers would give the Holy See a kickback.
That's what we need, Baptists and bootleggers, papists and publishers. Let's get it going. Until then, thanks, Sohrab. Thank you, Nina. And thanks, listeners. compactmag.com/subscribe. Lots of great stuff. I was off last week, maternity leave, and there was a ton of incredible stuff. Great writing on H.P. Lovecraft, just a whole host of things. So go subscribe.